I had been hiking with my friends, Jack, Nicole, and Ben, for a few days now. We had been following a well-marked trail through a dense forest, but after a while, the trail seemed to disappear. We wandered around for a while, trying to find our way back, but we were lost. We came across a narrow trail that we hadn't seen before. It was overgrown with bushes and vines, and it looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. We decided to follow it, hoping that it would lead us back to the main trail. The trail wound its way through the forest, getting narrower and narrower as we went. The trees grew closer together, and the sunlight barely reached the ground. The air was heavy and oppressive. We had been following the trail for about an hour when we came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large tree with gnarled branches and twisted roots. The tree was covered in strange symbols and carvings. We felt uneasy around the tree, but we continued on our way. We had gone a few more steps when we heard a noise behind us. We turned around and saw that the tree had moved. It was now blocking the trail behind us. We were trapped. We tried to find another way out of the clearing, but the trees were too close together. We were surrounded. We decided to camp in the clearing for the night. We gathered some firewood and started a fire. We huddled close to the fire, trying to stay warm. That night, we were all plagued by nightmares. We dreamed of strange creatures and terrifying events. In the morning, we woke up feeling exhausted and drained. We decided to try to find a way out of the clearing again. We searched for hours, but we couldn't find a way out. We were starting to lose hope. Suddenly, we heard a voice. "You're not welcome here," the voice said. We turned around and saw a figure standing behind us. It was a tall, thin figure with pale skin and long black hair. The figure's eyes were sunken and hollow. Who are you?" I asked. "I am the guardian of this forest," the figure said. "This forest is cursed. Those who enter it never leave." We tried to run, but the figure blocked our way. "You will stay here forever," the figure said. "Oh." The figure raised its hand, and we felt a strange power coursing through our bodies. We fell to the ground, paralyzed. We watched in horror as the figure transformed into a hideous creature. The creature had sharp teeth and claws, and its eyes were filled with hatred. The creature lunged at us, and we screamed in terror. We woke up the next morning, back in our tents. We looked at each other, and we knew that we had all dreamed the same thing. We decided to leave the clearing and never return. We packed up our camp and started walking away. We didn't look back. As we walked, we could hear the creature's laughter echoing through the forest. We never saw the creature again, but we knew that it was still there, waiting for us to return. We never went back to that forest. We still have nightmares about the creature and the cursed forest.
Next story.
I was on a solo hiking trip in the remote woods of northern Canada. I had been hiking for hours, and I was starting to get tired. I was also starting to get lost. I had been following a trail, but the trail had disappeared some time ago. I had been wandering around for a while, trying to find my way back, but I was starting to lose hope. Just when I was about to give up, I saw a cabin in the distance. It was a small wooden cabin with a single window. The cabin looked old and abandoned, but I decided to check it out anyway. I walked up to the cabin and knocked on the door. There was no answer. I tried the doorknob and it turned. The door opened and I stepped inside. The cabin was dark and dusty. The only light came from the single window. I could see that the cabin was furnished with a bed, a table, and a few chairs. There was also a fireplace in the corner of the room. I walked over to the fireplace and looked around. There was a stack of firewood next to the fireplace and a matchbox on the mantel. I picked up the matchbox and struck a match. I lit the fireplace and the room filled with light. I looked around the cabin again. There was nothing else in the cabin except for the furniture and the fireplace. I walked over to the window and looked out. I could see that the cabin was located in a clearing in the woods. The trees around the cabin were tall and thick. I decided to stay in the cabin for the night. I was tired and lost, and I didn't want to wander around the woods in the dark. I found a blanket on the bed and made a bed on the floor. I was exhausted, and I fell asleep quickly. I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise. I sat up and listened. The noise was coming from outside the cabin. I got out of bed and walked to the window. I looked out, but I couldn't see anything. The woods were dark and silent. I went back to bed and tried to fall asleep, but I couldn't. I was too scared. I woke up again a few hours later. The noise was back. It was louder this time. I got out of bed and walked to the window again. I looked out, and this time I saw something. There was a creature standing outside the cabin. It was tall and thin, with pale skin and long black hair. The creature's eyes were sunken and hollow. The creature was staring at me. I screamed and backed away from the window. I ran to the bed and pulled the blanket over my head. I lay in bed, shaking with fear. I could hear the creature moving around outside the cabin. I stayed in bed for hours until I was sure that the creature was gone. I got out of bed and went to the window. I looked out, but the creature was gone. I got dressed and packed my things. I was leaving the cabin. I walked out the door of the cabin and into the woods. I walked as fast as I could. I didn't look back.
Next story.
I had been hiking in the tropical jungle for hours when I felt a sharp pain in my ankle. I looked down and saw a small snake slithering away. I knew that I had been bitten by a venomous snake. I was terrified. I was miles away from the nearest trailhead, and I didn't have a cell phone signal. I was on my own. I started walking back the way I came, but I was soon feeling lightheaded and dizzy. The venom was starting to take effect. I knew that I couldn't keep walking for long. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and terrified. I knew that I was dying. I closed my eyes and waited for the end, but the end never came. I woke up to the sound of running water. I opened my eyes and saw a stream nearby. I dragged myself to the stream and drank deeply. The water seemed to revive me. I started to feel stronger. I stood up and looked around. I was still in the jungle, but I was closer to the trailhead than I thought. I started walking again. I walked for hours until I finally reached the trailhead. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted but relieved. I had survived. But my ordeal was far from over. I had been bitten by a venomous snake, and I knew that I needed to get to medical help quickly. But I was miles away from the nearest town, and I didn't have a car. I started walking down the road, hoping to find someone who could help me. I walked for hours, but I didn't see anyone. I was starting to lose hope. Just when I was about to give up, I saw a car coming up the road. I waved my arms and shouted, but the car didn't stop. I was devastated. I didn't know what to do. I sat down on the side of the road and started to cry. I was sure that I was going to die. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. I turned around and saw a man standing there. He was tall and thin, with pale skin and long black hair. His eyes were sunken and hollow. The man smiled at me. It was a cold, empty smile. "Are you lost?" the man asked. I nodded. "I can help you," the man said. "But first, you must come with me." I was hesitant, but I knew that I didn't have any other choice. I stood up and followed the man. We walked for a long time, until we reached a small village. The village was deserted. The man led me to a hut at the edge of the village. He told me to go inside and wait for him. I went inside the hut and sat down on the floor. The hut was dark and dusty. There was nothing in the hut except for a few pieces of broken furniture. I waited for the man to return, but he didn't come back. I started to get scared. I didn't know where the man was, or why he had brought me to this deserted village. I decided to leave the hut and look for the man. I went outside and started walking around the village. I called out the man's name, but he didn't answer. I was all alone. I started to panic. I didn't know what to do. I ran out of the village and into the jungle. I ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back. I ran for hours until I finally reached the road. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and terrified. I had escaped from the village, but I knew that the man was still out there. He was waiting for me. I got to my feet and started walking down the road. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I couldn't stay here. I walked for days until I finally reached a town. I went to the hospital and got treatment for the snake bite. I survived, but I was never the same again. I still have nightmares about the man and the deserted village. I know that he's still out there, waiting for me. I'm afraid to go back to the jungle, but I know that I have to. I have to find the man and stop him before he claims another victim. I'm going back to the jungle tomorrow. I don't know what I'll find, but I know that I have to face my fear.
As a huge support, please hit like, subscribe, and maybe share your thought or any experience before going to watch another video. Thank you so much. Have a good day.